The gavel hadn't fallen yet, but Marcus Webb already felt like a man standing in front of a firing squad. He sat at the defendant's table in room 4B of the Hartwell County Courthouse, his prosthetic leg locked stiff beneath him, his hands folded so tightly his knuckles had gone white. 12 feet away, at the plaintiff's table, Richard Colton leaned back in his chair like he was waiting for a waiter to bring dessert. He wasn't nervous. He was smiling. "All rise," the bailiff called, the Honourable Judge Eleanor Frost presiding. Marcus rose the way he always did now, slow, careful, one hand braced on the table. 3 years ago, he'd walked into a courthouse like this one, on 2 working legs. Now he walked in on 1 leg and a titanium rod, courtesy of an IED outside Kandahar that had taken his knee, 3 friends, and most nights of uninterrupted sleep. "This is a landlord-tenant eviction matter," Judge Frost said, opening a folder. "Colton Properties, LLC versus Marcus Webb. Mr. Colton, your attorney indicates you're seeking immediate possession of the unit at 214 Birchwood Lane, along with $11,000 in alleged damages." "That's correct, Your Honor," said Colton's attorney, a sharp young man named Derek Vance. Richard Colton, 58 years old, silver-haired, dressed in a suit that cost more than Marcus's monthly disability check, chuckled softly. Not loud enough to be held in contempt, just loud enough for Marcus to hear it, and for it to land exactly where it was aimed. Marcus's daughter, Emily, 11 years old, sat in the gallery behind him, gripping the strap of her backpack like it was the only solid thing left in her world. She had missed school for this. She didn't understand eviction law. She understood that men in suits were trying to take her home, and that her father, the strongest man she'd ever known, looked smaller every time he stood up. "Your Honor," Vance continued, "my client has been more than patient. Mr. Webb has fallen behind on rent, violated the terms of his lease by keeping an unauthorized animal on the premises, and has caused, according to our documentation, significant property damage. That animal," Marcus said quietly, "is a certified service dog. I have paperwork." "We'll get to your paperwork," Judge Frost said, not unkindly but firmly. "Sit down, Mr. Webb, until it's your turn." Marcus sat, his jaw tightened. Behind him, Emily reached forward and touched his shoulder just for a second. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. If he looked at her right now, he might lose the composure he'd been holding on to since 6 that morning. Then a woman stood at the defense table beside him, young, no older than 32, wearing a blazer that had clearly been pressed at midnight because there hadn't been time to do it any earlier. Her name was Sarah Reyes, a legal aid attorney who had taken Marcus's case for free 3 weeks earlier, after seeing his name on a stack of eviction filings that nobody else wanted to touch. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "before we go further, I'd like to place something on the record. My client is a disabled combat veteran with a documented service-connected disability rating of 80%. The dog in question, Duke, is a trained psychiatric service animal prescribed by the VA to manage his post-traumatic stress. Under the Fair Housing Act, a landlord cannot deny a reasonable accommodation for an assistance animal regardless of any no pets clause in the lease." Colton's smile didn't fade. If anything, it widened. "Objection, Your Honor," Vance said smoothly. "Counsel is getting ahead of herself. We haven't even entered our exhibits yet." "Sustained for now," Judge Frost said. "But Miss Reyes has raised a legitimate legal question, and I expect it to be addressed. Mr. Vance, please proceed with your case." Vance nodded and reached for a folder thick enough to double as a doorstop. "Your Honor, my client has documented 3 code violations at the unit, all directly attributable to Mr. Webb's alleged negligence. A damaged bathroom floor, holes in the drywall, and an unauthorized modification to the front entry ramp. We have photographs. He slid a stack of photos across to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. Marcus's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what those photos would show. What he didn't know yet, what nobody in that courtroom knew yet, except one person watching quietly from the back row in a grey hoodie, was that those photographs told a story that wasn't true. Judge Frost studied the images for a long moment. "These are dated 3 weeks ago," she said. "Mr. Vance, when did your client's property manager last inspect this unit prior to that?" "I'd have to check the file, Your Honor." "Please do, because, Miss Reyes, I assume you have a response to these photographs." "I do, Your Honor," Sarah said, standing again. "And I'd like to call a witness whose name is not currently on the plaintiff's disclosed witness list, but who has information directly relevant to how and when this damage occurred." Vance stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. "Your Honor, that witness was never disclosed to us." "She wasn't disclosed to me either, Mr. Vance, until 40 minutes ago," Sarah said. "She came to my office this morning." Richard Colton's smile finally cracked just slightly, just at the corner, the way ice cracks a half-second before it shatters completely. He turned and looked toward the back of the courtroom, and for the first time all morning, he did not look like a man enjoying himself. "Approach," Judge Frost said. At the bench, Sarah kept her voice low. "Your Honor, this witness was Mr. Colton's property manager until 11 days ago, when she resigned. She has first-hand knowledge that directly contradicts the timeline in these photographs. I understand the short notice is unusual, but given the severity of what's at stake, a family's home, I'm asking the court for leave to call her." Judge Frost studied Sarah, then glanced toward Vance, then toward the grey hoodie in the back row. "I'll allow it," she said. "But Mr. Vance, you'll have full opportunity to cross-examine. And Miss Reyes, this had better be worth the surprise." "It will be, Your Honor," Sarah said. "Believe me." Before the woman in the grey hoodie could be called, the courtroom doors opened again, and a second figure stepped in, a broad-shouldered man in a county inspector's polo shirt, holding a clipboard like it was a shield. He hesitated at the back of the room, unsure whether he was allowed to be there at all. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "I'd also ask the court's indulgence to briefly note the presence of Mr. Thomas Nakamura, a certified county building inspector who conducted an unrelated inspection at 214 Birchwood Lane 8 months ago for an entirely different unit in the same building. I intend to call him after Miss Ferris, should his testimony become relevant." "Your Honor," Vance said, exasperated, "how many surprise witnesses does the defense intend to produce today?" "As many as the truth requires, Mr. Vance," Judge Frost said evenly. "Sit down. We'll take them one at a time." The woman in the grey hoodie stood, pulled the hood back, and walked toward the witness stand. Her hands were shaking. Marcus had never seen her before in his life, but something about the way Richard Colton's face had gone pale told him this moment was about to change everything. "Please state your name for the record," the clerk said. "Denise Ferris," the woman said. "I was the property manager for Colton Properties for 6 years, until 11 days ago." Colton's attorney leaned over and whispered something urgent in his client's ear. Colton did not respond. He was staring at Denise like a man watching a ghost walk into daylight. "Miss Ferris," Sarah began, "can you tell the court why you resigned?" Denise's eyes flicked to Colton, then back to Sarah. "Because I was asked to do something I couldn't do anymore." "Objection vague," Vance said. "I'll allow the witness to explain," Judge Frost said. "Go ahead, Miss Ferris." Denise took a breath. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Colton told me he wanted Unit 214 vacated. He said the building was going up for sale to a developer, and a vacant unit with no tenant disputes would fetch $400,000 more than one with an active lease. He told me, and I remember this exactly, he said, "Find me a reason." The courtroom went silent. Even the court reporter's fingers paused over her keyboard for half a second. "And did you find him a reason?" Sarah asked. "I refused," Denise said. "So he brought in a contractor I'd never worked with before. I saw them go into Unit 214 together on a Sunday when Mr. Webb was at a VA appointment. I didn't think anything of it until I saw the photographs Mr. Coulton submitted for this case. The damage in those photos didn't exist the week before. I did a routine inspection myself, 10 days prior, for a different reason entirely, a plumbing complaint from the unit upstairs. I have my own photographs from that visit." She reached into a folder and slid a set of printed images toward Judge Frost. "These were taken by me, on my personal phone, 10 days before Mr. Coulton's photographs. As you can see, there is no damage to the bathroom floor, no holes in the drywall. The ramp is exactly as it was installed by a VA contracted specialist, with a signed accommodation letter that Mr. Coulton received and filed away himself." Vance's face had gone the color of old paper. "Your Honor," he started, "we'd need to authenticate." "We'll authenticate them, Mr. Vance," Judge Frost said, "right now. Miss Ferris, do you swear these photographs are unaltered, taken by you, on the date and time stamped?" "I swear it," Denise said, "and I have the original files with metadata which I've already given to Miss Reyes." Marcus sat frozen. Emily in the gallery had both hands pressed over her mouth. For 3 weeks, he had believed quietly, secretly, in the part of his mind where he kept the fear he never spoke aloud, that maybe this really was his fault. Maybe he really had let the place fall apart while his back was turned, while his leg ached, while the nightmares kept him up until 4 in the morning. Denise's testimony didn't just save his home. It told him something he badly needed to hear. It had never been his fault at all. Judge Frost turned to Coulton. "Mr. Coulton, do you have a response to this testimony?" Coulton straightened his jacket, and for a moment, the old confidence flickered back into his face. "Your Honor, Miss Ferris was terminated for poor performance. She has an obvious motive to fabricate a story against me." "I was not terminated," Denise said sharply, before anyone could stop her. "I resigned, and I have the resignation email, time-stamped, in which I specifically state I would not participate in manufacturing eviction grounds against a disabled veteran. I sent that email to Mr. Coulton and to his attorney's office." Vance turned slowly and looked at his own inbox on his laptop, scrolling with visible dread. His face had gone rigid, the look of a man realizing he had been standing next to a fire without smelling the smoke. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I'll need a brief recess to review this." "Granted," Judge Frost said. 15 minutes. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Marcus sat on a wooden bench with Duke's harness gripped in one hand. The dog had waited outside with a court officer, per courthouse policy, and now sat calmly at his feet, sensing the tremor in his owner's leg. Sarah crouched in front of him. "Marcus, I need you to breathe. This is good. This is very good." "Good?" Marcus's voice cracked. "Sarah, he set me up. He wanted to sell the building and he used a wounded vet as the excuse to clear it out. He laughed. In there. He laughed while a woman was talking about taking my daughters home." Marcus closed his eyes, and for a moment the fluorescent hallway lights dissolved into something else entirely, the flat white glare of a desert sun. He was back on the dirt road outside Kandahar, dust hanging in the air like fog, the Humvee ahead of his kicking up a cloud that swallowed the horizon. Staff Sergeant Danny Ruiz was laughing at something on the radio, the same easy laugh he always had, the kind that made a 14-hour patrol feel 5 minutes shorter. Marcus remembered reaching for his canteen. He remembered the sound before he remembered the light. A crack that wasn't a crack. A silence that wasn't silence. And then the world tilting sideways as the vehicle in front of him became a column of fire. He remembered waking up in a field hospital 3 days later and asking a nurse, before he asked about his own leg, whether Danny had made it. She hadn't answered. She hadn't needed to. Marcus. Sarah's voice pulled him back. Her hand was on his arm. Marcus, look at me. You're in the courthouse. You're safe. Emily's right there. He opened his eyes. The hallway was just a hallway again. Fluorescent lights, cheap tile, a vending machine humming against the far wall. Emily was watching him from a few feet away, her small face tight with worry, the way it got every time she noticed him drift somewhere she couldn't follow. I'm okay, he told her, and made himself believe it enough to say it steady. I'm okay, baby. You went somewhere, Emily said quietly. I came back, Marcus said. That's what matters. Sarah waited until Emily had drifted a few steps away, back toward her grandmother, before she spoke again. This is exactly why what happened in there today matters, Marcus. Not just the money, not just the apartment. It's that a man who's never had to fight for anything in his life gets to sit there and decide whether men like you and Danny get to keep the roof they came home to. Marcus nodded slowly, jaw tight. Yeah, he said. I can do that. 15 minutes. I can do 15 minutes. When court resumed, Vance looked like a man who had aged 5 years in 15 minutes. Your Honor, he said. In light of new information, the plaintiff wishes to withdraw the claim regarding property damage. Noted, Judge Frost said. That still leaves the claims regarding back rent and the unauthorized animal. Miss Reyes, your witness may step down, but I believe you have more to present. I do, Your Honor, Sarah said. I'd like to call Mr. Colton himself to the stand under the adverse witness rule. Colton's attorney objected, was overruled, and Colton walked to the stand with far less swagger than he'd carried into the room that morning. Mr. Colton, Sarah began, you received a signed VA accommodation letter regarding Mr. Webb's service animal, correct? Yes, I believe so. You believe so, or you did? I did. And you're aware that under federal fair housing law, a landlord cannot evict a tenant or use a pet policy as grounds for eviction when that animal is a documented service or assistance animal. I'm aware there are regulations, yes. Then why does your eviction filing list, as grounds number 2, unauthorized animal on premises, violation of Section 4 of the lease? Colton hesitated. My attorney drafted the filing. Your attorney drafted a filing listing a legally protected service animal as an eviction violation, and you signed it under penalty of perjury? Objection, Vance said weakly. Argumentative. I'll allow the question to stand as asked, Judge Frost said, and I'll note for the record that I share the concern. Colton's collar looked suddenly very tight. I didn't think it would matter. Landlords list multiple grounds all the time. It's standard practice. Is manufacturing a false claim of property damage also standard practice, Mr. Colton? Objection. Withdrawn, Sarah said, letting the question hang in the air anyway, exactly as she'd intended. Mr. Colton, isn't it true that you told your former property manager, quote, find me a reason to remove Mr. Webb from Unit 214? Colton's eyes darted toward Denise, sitting in the gallery now, arms crossed. I may have said something like that in frustration. It doesn't mean what, Mr. Colton? That you didn't mean it, or that you found someone willing to help you mean it anyway? The courtroom was utterly silent. Even Vance had stopped writing notes. I run a business, Colton said, his voice rising, the mask finally slipping all the way off. Do you understand what that unit is worth vacant? $400,000 more. That's not personal, that's real estate. It became personal, Sarah said quietly, the moment you laughed at a disabled combat veteran while trying to take away his home in front of his 11-year-old daughter. Colton opened his mouth to respond, and then, for the first time that day, said nothing at all. Sarah let the silence sit a moment longer before continuing. Mr. Colton, this isn't the first time a tenant with a disability has left one of your properties under circumstances like these, is it? Vance shot up. Your Honor, that's an entirely new line of questioning with no foundation. Foundation is coming, Your Honor, Sarah said, and reached into her folder for a second stack of documents. I'd like to enter into evidence public court filings from Delridge County, dated 2 years ago, a similar eviction case involving a tenant named Harold Boyce, also a disabled veteran, at a different property owned by Colton Properties LLC. That case was settled quietly out of court for an undisclosed sum 3 days before it was scheduled for trial. Judge Frost's expression sharpened. Mr. Vance, were you aware of this prior case? Your Honor, I wasn't retained by Colton Properties 2 years ago. That wasn't my question. Vance said nothing. Colton, on the stand, had gone very still. Mr. Colton, Sarah pressed, did you settle with Mr. Boyce to keep this exact pattern out of a public trial record? On advice of counsel at the time, yes, Colton said, his voice smaller now than it had been all morning. So this isn't a business decision that happened once, Sarah said. It's a pattern. Find a disabled tenant, manufacture a reason, force them out, settle quietly if it ever gets close to daylight. Until today, when it didn't settle quietly, because a woman in this courtroom decided she wasn't willing to help you do it a second time. Objection, Vance said, though his voice had lost all its earlier conviction. Counsel is testifying, not questioning. Judge Frost turned briefly to Colton before ruling, studying him the way a person studies a photograph they no longer recognize. Mr. Colton, before I rule on that objection, I want to ask you something plainly, off the record of legal argument and onto the record of conscience. Did it ever once occur to you, sitting across from a man who lost part of his leg defending this country, that perhaps he deserved better than being treated as an inconvenient number on a spreadsheet? Colton opened his mouth, then closed it again. For several long seconds, the only sound in the courtroom was the soft tick of the wall clock above the jury box. I don't know, Colton finally said quietly, and for once it didn't sound like a performance. I didn't let myself think about it that way. Perhaps you should have, Judge Frost said. Sustained, she added, turning back to the attorneys. But barely, Miss Reyes. Move it along. Nothing further for this witness, Your Honor, Sarah said, and sat down. One more witness before we close, Your Honor, Sarah said. I'd like to call Thomas Nakamura. The inspector walked to the stand, still holding his clipboard like it might steady his nerves. He'd clearly never expected his Tuesday to end in a courtroom. Mr. Nakamura, Sarah began, you inspected a unit at 214 Birchwood Lane 8 months ago. Can you tell the court what you found? I was called out for a different unit, Nakamura said. Unit 210, a water intrusion complaint. But while I was in the building, the property manager at the time, Miss Ferris, I believe walked me through Unit 214 as a courtesy, since Mr. Colton had asked her to get a general condition assessment for insurance purposes. I documented it in my county file, structurally sound. No code violations. The entry ramp was compliant and properly permitted. And is that report a matter of public record? It is. County building records are public. Anyone could have requested it. Which means, Sarah said, turning slightly toward the bench. That 8 months before this eviction filing, an independent government-certified inspector confirmed this unit had no damage and a properly permitted accessibility ramp. The very same ramp Mr. Colton's filing now claims was an unauthorized modification. Vance said nothing. There was nothing left to object to. Nothing further, Your Honor, Sarah said. Judge Frost took a short recess to review the documents, then returned to the bench with a folder considerably thinner than the one Vance had brought that morning, because most of what remained in it no longer mattered. I've heard enough, she said, and the courtroom seemed to lean forward as one body. Let me be clear about what this record now shows. Mr. Colton attempted to remove a tenant, a disabled veteran with an 80% service-connected disability, in possession of a documented and legally protected service animal by fabricating property damage in order to increase the resale value of his building. He did this while that tenant's minor daughter watched her home be threatened by a man who found the entire proceeding amusing. And the evidence before me suggests this was not an isolated lapse in judgment, but a repeated business practice. She looked directly at Colton, who no longer had anywhere comfortable to rest his eyes. This court finds in favor of the defendant, Marcus Webb, on all counts. The eviction is denied. The claim for damages is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential fraud and perjury charges related to the falsified evidence submitted to this court. I am also referring the Boyce settlement and this case together to the State Fair Housing Enforcement Division for a full pattern of conduct investigation into Colton Properties LLC, and I am ordering that a copy of today's transcript accompany that referral. She paused, letting the weight of it settle over the room, then turned her attention fully to Marcus. Mr. Webb, this court owes you an apology for the manner in which this hearing began. No veteran, no parent, no human being should have to sit in a room and be laughed at while fighting for their home. That will not happen again in my courtroom, and it should not happen in any courtroom in this country. Marcus's throat closed up. He nodded, unable to speak. Additionally, Judge Frost continued, given the documented bad faith conduct of the plaintiff, I am awarding the defendant $15,000 in compensatory damages, covering legal costs, emotional distress, and the disruption caused to his household, including his minor child. I am also ordering that Colton Properties cover Mr. Webb's reasonable attorney's fees in full, effective immediately. Somewhere behind him, Marcus heard Emily's grandmother let out a breath she must have been holding since the gavel first sounded that morning. Mr. Vance, Judge Frost added, turning to the attorney whose pen had stopped moving entirely, I would strongly encourage you to review exactly what your client asked you to file on his behalf, and to consider your own obligations to this court going forward. You are an officer of this court before you are anyone's advocate. Don't forget that again. Vance nodded once, his jaw tight, and did not look at Colton. This court is adjourned, Judge Frost said. The gavel came down once, sharp and final. Outside the courthouse, on the wide stone steps overlooking the parking lot, Marcus finally allowed himself to sit down on the cold concrete and put his face in his hands. Duke pressed his head against his owner's knee. Emily ran down the steps and wrapped both arms around her father's neck. We get to stay? She whispered. In our house? With my room? We get to stay, Marcus said, his voice breaking on the last word. Behind them, Denise Ferris walked out of the courthouse alone, no umbrella, letting the light rain fall on her shoulders. Sarah caught up to her. You didn't have to come forward, Sarah said. You could have stayed quiet and kept your reputation clean with people like Colton. I spent 6 years managing properties for a man who saw people as line items, Denise said. "I have a son who's about to enlist. I couldn't sit at home knowing what I let happen to men like his future self." Sarah nodded and said nothing more. Some things didn't need more words. A few feet away, Derek Vance stood alone by his car, briefcase in hand, staring back at the courthouse doors he'd walked through that morning as Colton's confident young attorney. He didn't look confident now. He looked like a man doing math he should have done weeks earlier. He got in his car without a word to anyone and drove off before Colton had even made it down the steps. Marcus stood up slowly, one hand on Emily's shoulder, the other gripping Duke's harness. He looked back at the courthouse doors one final time, the same doors he'd walked through that morning, believing he might lose everything. "Dad," Emily said, tugging his sleeve, "does this mean the bad man goes to jail?" Marcus crouched down to her eye level, wincing only slightly as his prosthetic locked into place. "It means the truth finally got a chance to talk," he said. "And when it does, sweetheart, it usually wins." He took her hand, whistled softly for Duke, and walked down the courthouse steps toward the car toward home, toward Saturday morning cartoons and a bedroom that was still, against every laugh a rich man had thrown across a courtroom, still theirs. Some men measure victory in dollars. Marcus Webb measured his in a front door he still had the keys to. 6 weeks later, the porch light at 214 Birchwood Lane still worked exactly the way it always had, a small, stubborn detail that meant more to Marcus now than it ever had before. He stood on that porch on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, watching Emily chase Duke across the small strip of yard out front, her laughter carrying down the block in a way it hadn't in months. Sarah's phone call had come 2 days earlier. The district attorney's office had filed formal charges against Richard Colton for submitting falsified evidence to the court, a felony count, given the pattern uncovered in the Boyce case. The State Fair Housing Division had opened a full investigation into Colton Properties LLC, and 2 other tenants, neither of them veterans, had already come forward with their own complaints once the story made the local news. Harold Boyce, the veteran from the Delridge County case 2 years earlier, had called Sarah's office the same week the verdict came down. He hadn't asked for anything. He'd just wanted someone to know that what happened to him had a name now, and that it hadn't been his fault either. Derek Vance had resigned from Colton's legal team within the month. Word around the courthouse was that he'd taken a position with a non-profit housing rights organization 2 counties over, the kind of career move nobody makes unless something in a courtroom has genuinely rearranged how they see their own work. Denise Ferris had started training for a new job entirely, one with the Veterans Affairs Housing Assistance Office, helping other families navigate exactly the kind of fight Marcus had almost lost. Marcus still had bad nights. He still saw Danny Ruiz's face some evenings when the house got too quiet, still gripped Duke's harness a little tighter on the days the memories crowded in uninvited. Some wars didn't end with a verdict, but this one small piece of his life. The porch, the yard, the bedroom with Emily's name still taped crookedly to the door in glitter letters she'd made in 2nd grade, that piece was finally, fully his again. That evening, as the sun dropped low over Birchwood Lane, Emily flopped onto the porch step beside him, breathless from the game, Duke collapsing happily at her feet. "Dad," she said, "are we ever going to have to go back to that courtroom again?" Marcus looked out at the yard, at the mailbox with their name on it, at the whole small, stubborn life he'd almost lost to a man who thought a wounded veteran was just a line on a spreadsheet. "No, baby," he said. "That door's closed for good. This one right here." He nodded toward the front door behind them. "This is the only one that matters now." She smiled and leaned her head against his arm, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus let himself simply sit there, in the quiet, and believe it. Some men measure victory in dollars. Marcus Webb measured his in a front door he still had the keys to, and in a daughter who finally, once again, believed that door would always be theirs.